Hope you had an enjoyable lunch and that the discussions were fruitful. It was a very ambitious project to break up everybody out into these 8 groups, but I, again, hope that something useful came out of it. But we're now going to get back in the swing of things with our next session, Beyond the Nonprofit Niche, What the Social Sector Has to Teach Us About Social Problems and Social Change. This session will provide an interactive demonstration of how 2 of the Foundation Center's core offerings that are not directly related to direct fundraising, which are the Philanthropy News Digest and IssueLab, how they can be used to inform better solutions to address the challenges that nonprofits everywhere face every day. So I'd like to now introduce our speakers. We have Cheryl Lowe, who is the Foundation Center's Communication Project Manager, who is going to moderate this session. And then we also have Fitz, who is the Foundation Center's Director of Knowledge Management Initiatives, and Mitch Nauffts, who is the Publisher Editorial Director of the Foundation Center's Philanthropy News Digest. So please help me in welcoming Cheryl, Gabi, and Mitch.
Thanks, Keith. And you just did have my introduction, so thanks for that. So welcome, everybody. I also hope you had a good lunch. During our time today together, as Keith mentioned, we're going to give you an in-depth look at the Foundation Center's core knowledge services, IssueLab, and Philanthropy News Digest. Philanthropy News Digest, which we often refer to as PND, so you'll hear that a lot, is the Foundation Center's longtime service that not only reports news and philanthropy, but also publishes interviews with and commentary by leaders in the field, reviews new books in the social sector, and it's one of the most popular places where nonprofits look for jobs and for requests for proposals. IssueLab is one of the largest collections of social sector knowledge anywhere. It contains more than 13,000 documents that analyze the world's most pressing social, economic, and environmental challenges and their potential solutions. Together, these resources represent a huge store of valuable information for anyone working on social sector issues. So Mitch and Gabi are going to give you a brief overview of these 2 online tools. Then we'll devote the bulk of our session to demonstrating in real time how you might use them to do your own research on real-world topics and questions. So we'll be needing your participation for that exercise. And we'll be asking you to contribute ideas for topics and questions that are of interest in your community or questions that you may have actually gotten from your visitors. But first, a little bit of background. What you see on the screen now is the Foundation Center's 2012 annual report homepage. And it shows the Foundation Center's strategic priorities, which I hope you have all heard about already, if not today, then before. Just to review the Foundation Center's stated goals, which were first outlined in our Foundation Center 2020 plan that was launched a couple of years ago. And I'm going to read these for you just to review because you can't read them, I don't think, from on the screen. So the first one is encourage greater foundation transparency. Then we have connect nonprofits to the resources they need to thrive. And the Funding Information Network program falls squarely into this category. Then we have empower donors with the knowledge tools they need to be more strategic. Build the global data platform for philanthropy, and communicate philanthropy's contribution to making a better world. And this is the priority we'll be focusing on today. But there's also a 6th priority I'd like to mention, because it's not represented on the circle here, but it really underpins all of our work in this digital age. And that priority is ensure that our technology provides a strong foundation for the Foundation Center's work. And that is crucial and a prerequisite for the online resources that we'll be discussing today. And of course, there's a fair amount of overlap across these priorities and the types of resources associated with each that we offer. And that's indicated by the shading that you see in the inner circle here. But today we're really going to home in on how the Foundation Center communicates philanthropy's contribution to making a better world. And in this category, you'll see that many of the items listed relate to important research that the Foundation Center does and conducts on philanthropy. But IssueLab and Philanthropy News Digest are what we're going to focus on today. So we know that your primary role as a partner in our funding information network is to be a place in your community where people can find information on fundraising and where they can use the various tools that will help them find funders for their nonprofits and for their projects. But in this conversation, we're going to shift our focus away from the fundraising specific tools for a moment to consider some of the other very valuable Foundation Center resources, knowledge tools whose breadth and depth you may not be entirely aware of, but which can help you do your job beyond that as a supervisor of the Foundation Center collection. And if your library is like ours, the folks coming to you for funding research assistance are not necessarily professional fundraisers, but rather they're more likely people who are running nonprofits, people who are working on social issues for which, incidentally, they need to raise money. There are people looking who are not just for money, but for the best ideas out there that will help them succeed in their goal of making the world a better place, whether it be through educational programs, environmental work, health services, you name it. So this is where IssueLab and P&D come in. These resources can help you build knowledge in your community about social problems and their potential solutions. The stories and information and reports that you'll find that you'll discover using these tools reflect the work of countless people and organizations across the country and the world who are also working on social issues in their own communities. These large bodies of knowledge are made up of thousands upon thousands of discrete pieces of information, but which, thanks to the Foundation Center, are easily and quickly accessible to anyone, anywhere. So ultimately, the valuable information that social sector organizations can get with these tools helps them maximize the impact of the funding they work so hard to get. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to our experts on these tools, Gabi and Mitch. And after they each give you an overview, we'll get down to the interactive part of our session, which is to throw out questions that Mitch and Gabi can use to show us exactly how to put these tools to use and the wealth of information and knowledge that you can uncover with them.
Hi. Let me bring up the right thing here. That's not it. Cheryl, do you know where the PowerPoint is? Oh, here. It's right in front of me, right there? No.
The other one. Keep left. Do you guys know
Where you loaded the...
Sorry, a little technical difficulty.
It's just not there yet. It'll be there in a second.
You can let Mitch start.
Do you want to start, Mitch?
Sure.
And then we can switch gears, or if it'll take someone just a second to load the... I just don't know where it's stored on the hard drive. On the desktop, okay.
Vermont. Here, I got, he's got it.
There we go. All right. Thank you. All right. All right, now we're on our way. So thanks for the introduction, Cheryl, and thanks, Keith, for bringing it up. I'm really pleased that you all could join us today. I hope that the discussion that we're going to have, and I hope that what I show you here today is useful to your work. What I'm here to talk about today is really a largely overlooked and underutilized body of knowledge that I think could be very useful to you and to the patrons that are coming into your libraries. Really, it's the collective intelligence of the social sector, an enormous and ever-growing body of knowledge about critical social issues. And I'm not talking about prospect research here or grants data, which I think is often what we talk about when we talk about the Foundation Center services. What I'm talking about here is really the R&D function of the nonprofit sector. So both foundations and nonprofits have a treasure trove of knowledge based on firsthand experience of not just social problems at the community level, but also of interventions and solutions being used to address those problems. The fact is that most people think of the sector as either providing funding or providing services, such as housing, food, or after-school education. But what they don't know, or what they often take for granted, is that the sector also provides knowledge. Knowledge about what the problems are and about how we might solve them. So we don't just help teachers become more effective. The sector also documents and evaluates what we're learning about teacher effectiveness. And we don't just build playgrounds. We also collect data about why and how the building of playgrounds can change a neighborhood and community. So we don't just provide solutions. The sector also tests them, observes them, analyzes them, and tries to understand and explain why or why not why they aren't working. In other words, we provide the R&D for social change. This body of research, which is often called gray literature because there's no formal, commercial, and widely accessible publishing system for it, is fast-growing. It's produced by organizations large and small, associations, foundations, small community-based organizations, large national nonprofits, think tanks, university-based research centers publishing for non-academic audiences, and evaluators and consultants. And the body of literature is also made up of research that uses all kinds of different methodologies, including rigorous longitudinal surveys, as well as community ethnographies, participatory evaluations, and more academic literature reviews. And it also takes many forms, most of which you're familiar with: case studies, evaluations, lessons learned, toolkits, white papers. So you may never have thought of this all as really a body of literature, but it is, and it's a body of knowledge that deeply informs the work that nonprofits and foundations do. It's an essential resource that helps program officers, executive directors, advocates, and researchers avoid having to recreate the wheel. But as valuable as this collective resource is, it's also often difficult to track down and to systematically review. Right now, hundreds of different organizations publish some portion of their research to their own websites. At best, each of these organizations publishes its own research to its own website, which may or may not be linked to the related organizations and resources. That's at best. Many more share only a portion of what they funded or published, or they only share research produced after some arbitrary date, or by particular grantees, or some kind of other internal logic about what they're putting on their site and what they're not putting on their site. And those are largely often dictated by communications decisions and communication strategies versus a knowledge sharing or archiving strategy. And even the most well-intentioned publication sections have dead links to documents that were moved, retired, or simply lost by mistake. This means that if you're looking for the current state of knowledge about an issue or a type of intervention, you're often left with this sort of scattershot search process, which more often than not consists almost entirely of a Google search. And this is something that I actually ask people all the time. How do you find the knowledge you need, and how do you know when you know it and you have it? And almost universally, people say they start with a Google search, which is not a problem in itself, but I think we all know in this room that that does not, in fact, represent a research strategy. It's a beginning point, it's not a system. So, at IssueLab, we recognize that knowledge will always, and honestly should always be, shared in all of these places that we mentioned. It's going to be shared by people on organizational websites, information clearinghouses, or even through those impromptu email threads that seem to go on and on forever, and we file them into our miscellaneous folder. It's how people share knowledge. They'll probably always share knowledge that way. People are not always going to come to one place to find everything they need. But that doesn't mean that we don't also recognize that the process of identifying and accessing relevant research has to be as hard as it is today, which is why we designed IssueLab, to collect, index, and share this incredible body of knowledge so that other nonprofits and foundations can build on that collective intelligence. And really to make the work of librarians, like people in this room, much, much easier. So through IssueLab, the Foundation Center helps the social sector to more effectively gather, index, and share its collective intelligence. And all of the resources and access to IssueLab are completely free. But before I go into a little bit more detail about what you can find on IssueLab and some suggestions about how to use it, I do want to note that really collecting and indexing knowledge is just one part of what we do. We believe that this knowledge is literally produced to be shared. It does not serve its purpose if funders, practitioners, and other researchers can't make use of it to improve their decisions in their programs. So the most obvious way we do this, I've already described, through this sort of centralized indexing at IssueLab. People come to IssueLab, they add resources to the collection, they describe those resources with metadata, and the resources become part of the larger data share that we provide visitors who use the website to find and access knowledge. But in addition to centralized indexing and providing a destination to learn about and access this knowledge, we very much see and very much actively pursue what we call a decentralized distribution approach. So when an organization, for instance, adds its work to IssueLab, represented by the little green document, their knowledge gets shared automatically through a network of distributors, including IssueLab, where it goes into, and then all of our audience members, including nonprofit practitioners, grant makers, advocates, and researchers, but also through websites that are using our Knowledge Center service to run and manage their own e-libraries on their own sites, through the OCLC's WorldCat service, which means that documents that are added to IssueLab are automatically on a daily basis updated to WorldCat and made available in 10,000 plus public libraries, and also through data partner websites. So for example, we provide online communities that are maybe focused on a particular slice of what's in IssueLab with a query that just pulls that data. So for instance, an online community of environmental activists may be pulling research from IssueLab that's just that stream that's about energy and the environment. And then we also automatically share it through Foundation Center's channels. So that's the Foundation Center's Gain Knowledge section, Grant Space, Foundation Directory Online. If you go and you look up a grant maker profile, there'll also be a tab that shows you what publications they've funded. And obviously each of these properties has its own audience type. So the idea is that we're not trying to get everybody on earth to use IssueLab. We're trying to make sure that what's in IssueLab reaches people in as many places as possible where they're already going. So let me get out of this situation and get into this one. That was easier than I expected. All right. So now that you have a bigger view of what we do, let me take you right into the collection itself and show you how you might use it to answer the questions that people come to you with. So this is our homepage. To date, we've collected more than 13,000 white papers, research reports, case studies, evaluations, toolkits, surveys, issue and policy briefs, annual reports, and more. And the collection honestly grows every single day. We can't keep up with the amount of research that's being produced by this sector. So if we click through on any one of these, we'll just pick this one for instance. You get to an actual listing page. And as librarians, this should be pretty obvious and intuitive. Basically, each title gets more detailed metadata attached to different points about the report itself. We, meaning our community of users that add research to the system, but also IssueLab staff, one of whom's in the back and who does this all day long, attach metadata to each record that we collect. So the metadata we collect includes authors, funders, publishing organization, copyright, date published, keywords, geographic location, document type, and an abstract. And on a lot of this literature, because it's not standardized, that means opening the document and digging through and trying to find this stuff. This doesn't just make search on IssueLab possible, it also improves the discoverability of this work by search engines. So often when people are searching on a report title, they'll find it at IssueLab ranked higher than they will on the organization's website. That's for a bunch of different reasons related to how search engines optimize results. But one of them is that we're doing this kind of detailed metadata work at each listing. We also make all files available to download for free. We only accept work that's available for free, linking users first to the publishing organization's website, and then if that's broken, to a backup copy of the resource on IssueLab. And when technically possible, like in this case actually, meaning we received a file that can be converted into other formats, we also create this scrollable document that you can put into full screen and search so that you can make a decision about whether that's something you want to read before you're downloading it. The second sort of simplest, or one of the sort of more popular ways to browse this collection that is growing, is by issue area. And that's pretty clear. Nonprofits, it's often how they organize their work and how they sort of come to the work. So IssueLab's taxonomy covers 40 issue areas geared toward the social sector. That's big, thorny issues that you'd expect when you think about social change. Issues like community and economic development, education and literacy, energy and the environment, housing and homelessness, hunger, immigration, poverty, but also issues like arts and culture, athletic and sports, consumer protection, journalism and media, parenting, and transportation. So you'll see, for instance, that we have 562 resources that are classified as being about this issue of housing and homelessness. One of the things about IssueLab is that we built it as an interdisciplinary archive. And so any single listing can be cross-referenced under 3 issue areas. Obviously, people who are working on housing are often also working on aging and often working on related complex social issues. So to kind of try to slot them into one category is unnecessary and limiting. So this allows that kind of cross-referencing, but also cross-pollinating of those ideas. So the second way that I want to show you that you could actually use IssueLab is to search IssueLab by organizations. So currently we have a little more than 2,500 organizations who are publishing and sharing resources through IssueLab. Every organization has an organizational profile that includes contact information, a website address, in some cases a mission statement, as well as a list of authors affiliated with that organization. Let's take a look at this one. So you'll see here, they have 2 listings in there. What issue areas do they fall into? Who are the authors who are actually authoring that work? And then contact information for the organization. Another way to understand the collection is through authors. And this is kind of an interesting one because when we launched the latest version of IssueLab last year that consolidated all of what was in PubHub and also what was in IssueLab, we pulled that all together into a single collection. And one of the things that we were able to pull out was over 9,000 discrete authors, which we felt like warranted its own section and is actually an area that we're planning some development around. Because really, this is a pretty unique data set in the sector. These authors really are issue experts. They're not indexed in any other place. They're not often also having profiles in things like academia because they're not necessarily publishing in academic journals. So we think that in the future, this will actually become more and more useful as people begin to look not just for what is known about an issue, but who knows it. And this is something that's really important when we talk about democratizing access to knowledge that we think IssueLab is a contribution towards, is that it isn't just left to the program officer who happens to know who the issue experts are, but that really everybody should have access to those people and to their knowledge. And then the last way I want to show you that you can actually explore the collection is through geographic region. So every time we add a report to the collection, we also look at the geographic region that's being addressed in the report. We currently have over 700 geographic areas in use. It's a nested hierarchy, so if you searched San Francisco, for instance, you'd also get to California, North America, et cetera, et cetera. And really the goal there is to help people to make comparisons. Maybe they say, I'm doing a particular kind of programming in a city that's around the same size as Denver. What kinds of work is happening, what kind of work is happening around community health in Denver? And then the last thing I want to show you is just a couple other ways that we organize content in IssueLab, which we call special collections. And the first is this collection of annual reports, which right now we have 820 annual reports in the collection. These are automatically pulled out. Anytime a report is added and is tagged as an annual report, it automatically feeds this special collection. The second kind of special collection we do, though, is one that's a little bit more heavily curated. So for instance, after the shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, we pulled together 30, and now it's grown to 33 reports in the last few months that address that issue that nonprofits and foundations had produced. And those are really hand-picked reports. We try to get a good breadth on the issue. We try to make sure that different kinds of organizational perspectives are represented. And so these kind of heavily curated collections we roll out usually on a quarterly basis, unless there's an issue that really comes up and we immediately respond. So we're putting together one right now actually on the Affordable Care Act. So again, this is an example of there's all this knowledge in the sector that's really a unique kind of knowledge, and it's so difficult for people to access right now. And so that's really the essential role that we're playing here. So I'm hoping that offers you a good introduction to what IssueLab does and what kinds of content we're working on collecting and sharing. Whether someone comes to you with a question about gun violence in America or about the organizations that are experimenting with new after-school programming, IssueLab, we believe, really can help you answer those questions based on the hard work, the experience, and the intelligence collectively of the organizations who author this valuable knowledge and who are often delivering the services on the ground. So that's IssueLab in a nutshell.
Thanks, Gabby. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. Just a little bit forward. Philanthropy News Digest, P&D, dates back to December 1994, when the center launched its original website, one of the first in the nonprofit sector. The idea for P&D came from library staff here in New York, in fact, which back then was in the habit of clipping philanthropy-related articles from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, putting them in a manila envelope and putting that at the front desk for patrons who came into the library. As that first website was being developed and we were looking for content to use on it, library staff said, hey, why don't we create periodical citations of those clippings and put them on the site? And that's how P&D was born. After a year or so, with more and more organizations and more content moving to the web, we decided to expand those efforts beyond the Times and the Wall Street Journal to other newspapers and publications. And we took the additional step of creating abstracts to go along with the source citations. 18 years later, wow. That real-time aggregation and digesting activity is still core to what we do at P&D. Every day, P&D staff canvasses hundreds of nonprofit websites, news and publication sites, and other sources for items of interest to the social sector, and then creates well-crafted abstracts of those items for the website. As you can see here, this is a pretty representative sample, today's items, a big grant, a story about fallout from the government shutdown, another grant from a bequest, and a new initiative that was announced at the Independent Sector Conference earlier this week here in New York, in this case by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and by IS. But that's not all we do. Along the way, we've added a dozen or so features and services to P&D. We've added book reviews off the shelf and reviews of interesting nonprofits and interesting web apps. We've added funding opportunities and a free job board, newsmaker interviews, items, annotated links to interesting reports. We've added a blog, we've added a Twitter feed, we've added video chat, and we've added original and third-party articles from content providers like Stanford Social Innovation Review, TechSoup, and Alliance Magazine. What does it all mean in a nutshell? It means over the last decade and a half or so, we've managed to create one of the most comprehensive archives of news and features related to the U.S. social sector on the web. Today, that archive comprises more than 20,000 individual items going back to January 2000, and the entire archive is searchable on almost every web page on the P&D site. So let's say you have a patron at your information center, and I'll try to do this here, who's interested in healthcare. Do I not have it right? I'm the worst type. If they were to type healthcare into the search box, they would get back 1,300 items displayed in reverse chron order, including stories about interesting initiatives, grants of over $1 million, articles, links to reports and so on. I'm not going to click into any of these right now because we'll have a chance to do that in the next segment. I just wanted to briefly illustrate how much information is available, and if we scroll to the bottom, you can step through using the next button to, as I said, 1,300 items. I also want to show you the new site that we've been working on for the last 10 months. And we've been doing that because this site that we're looking at here dates to late 2006. So it's almost 7 years old, only one dog year, but really a long time in web years. The new site, which is scheduled to launch at the end of October, and in fact, we've just migrated all the data associated with that new site to the platform overnight, is going to give us a lot more functionality, a lot more search options, a lot more value add for the users. So if the demo gods are with us, and they are, I can show you that site. Design is far from finished. The content in the right rail, for example, hasn't been finalized. There are design issues throughout the site. But as you can see, we've not only updated the look of the site, we've brought our social media efforts to the fore here with links to Philanthropy, our popular blog, our very active Twitter feed, our video chats, which are down here, our flip chats, we call them. We've provided easier access to original commentary and features through this nifty tab feature here. So as those are posted to the site, they feed to this section of the front page, news, features, etc. And we've enhanced a lot of functionality behind the scenes, including search. So if I were to type in healthcare here, for example, spell it right, I did this time. Don't ask me for an email.
I think you have to go up.
Oh, I am in subscribe. See, it is brand new.
There you go.
And I can't see.
The error trapping's working.
Yep. You'll see the results page looks a lot different. First of all, the results are ordered by relevancy, not by reverse cron. Each result has a helpful description with it. You can control the number of results on the page up to 100. And if you don't want everything provided in a mashup across all content items, you can use the filters on the left rail here to filter by content type. If you only wanted to see news items, for example, that would be easily done. And you get a wonderful page of results about healthcare, et cetera. You can see the different filters, subject, and content type, and even date when it's finally working. So if you only want the last 3 months worth of results, we can provide that. So that's a look at what we're up to and what we've been up to. And with that, I'll turn it back to Cheryl to take us into the next segment.
Thanks for that preview of the redesign of P&D Mitch. I can't wait until it launches.
I can't either.
So now that we know a little more about what information we can find in IssueLab and P&D, we're going to be throwing some topics and questions to Mitch and Gabi so that we can see it, dig deeper and see what you can really uncover about some real topics that those of us in this room are interested in. I'm going to get the ball rolling with the first question, but I want you guys to be thinking about what questions you might have for them after that. And I think you're meant to come up to this microphone at that point where Dave is sitting so that we can make sure we capture the audio and the video for the online audience. So here's my sample question, which I've totally made up.
Yeah, totally.
So let's say I'm a funding information network location supervisor in Austin, Texas. And I have a question from a library visitor who is looking to design arts education programs for school children. Because the state has been slashing budgets for in-school programs, and this person's organization is hoping to fill the gaps that have been left behind. So some of the questions that she has are, what foundations are working on arts education programs, and what other organizations are they working with? Is there any research on what programs have worked and what haven't, either in Texas or in other states that this person might learn from? And what are... I have more questions. What are some of the questions researchers are addressing? And finally, what is the latest news on arts education funding and programs? You don't each have to answer all the questions, but you get the gist of it. So we're going to let Gabby and Mitch take turns kind of showing you how, if you had that question in front of you, how you would use these tools to do that kind of a research. So I'm going to start aside. You want to draw straws?
I'll go. Me. All right, that's an easy one, actually, because we just put together a special collection on arts education. So thank you, Cheryl.
I had no idea.
I know. But even if the special collection on arts education wasn't there, you could still find this answer, because really the special collection on arts education is just pulled together through searches and then a fair amount on our part of sort of hand massaging that collection to pull out some stuff that was maybe really specific to 2009 and a bill in 2009 that isn't so relevant today. So the special collection is a curated search, essentially. So I'll show you a little bit about it, because it answers, I think, that question of, what foundations are working in this field, what organizations are working in this field, and what do we know about what's happening in the field. And I think probably, my guess is people come to you with a similar sort of question, and you would send them to something like Foundation Directory Online to start to look at those relationships between organizations and funders. And I think that's an awesome place to start and continues to be a really great place to start. I think what IssueLab can offer is a little bit more of a perspective then on what emerged from that funding, right? What came after the funding? What are the organizations that got funding learning about what's working and what isn't working? So in the case of this special collection, for instance, we actually organized it into some different topic areas that began to kind of surface as we were looking at the collection. Classroom examples, community versus individual student outcomes, funding trends, and program models. So really trying to get at some of the questions that practitioners and grant makers might be asking about this. But I do want to show you in the advanced search, and this is, again, I'll show you a different way of getting at the same information, but you'll see that you can actually see what organizations or which organizations are publishing work on that topic. So it's a little bit of a different lens on this question of who's getting funded, right? So these organizations are often funded to do this research, but they're also, some of the research is not in itself funded, it's just coming out of their general operating. So you may not have found a grant in FDO for this research, but the research is in IssueLab. Same thing on on funders. So these are funders who are funding research on research and knowledge production around arts education. So if you went into, let's say, a single document too, let's go just down into Annual Arts and Schools Report, you could see that you could actually go into the New York City Department of Education, click into them as a publishing organization, see what else they have published, or for that matter, go into the geographic area and see who else might be publishing research about that area. Now, let's say the arts collection didn't exist at all. You could have gotten to it a couple of different ways. You could have gotten to it through looking at issue areas of arts and culture, and then filtering by a keyword on arts education. So even if this didn't exist as a special collection, this is the way that you could drill down on a similar kind of question around another topic. And something quickly that I haven't shown so far is the advanced search. You could actually have just done a keyword search from the homepage on, it's weird, it's like you're disconnected from that's part of why the typing is so hard. If you have a phrase like arts education and you know that's the way people are actually talking about it, then we usually search on exact phrase. And you'd get 79 reports back. Now you see that that's a narrower subset that ended up in the special collection because we were pulling things that were a broader search but may not have used that term. And then you could also have done an advanced search, same deal, or looking at a particular kind, filtering down to a particular kind of thing, like I only want case studies about arts education. So that's my answer. And I'm sticking to
Very
it.
helpful.
I think I'm going to stick with the old site because I know it works, and this site is actually a sandbox site, so I'm not sure all the data is here. So let's try the old site. Austin, Texas is not the biggest nonprofit ecosystem in the world, so it might not have the best representation in the archive. In fact, I searched on it and didn't find much. So what I would do in a case like that is search for the broader topic, arts education. And the look you're going to get from P&D is more of a trend look, I think, although you will get funding information and you might even find funding opportunities. In this case, I believe there is a result from Austin somewhere in this list. But what you would see,
Yeah, the third one down.
third one down. So we'll click into that. It's not arts education per se, although I'm guessing that this grant of $9 million, this is what P&D abstract looks like, includes a component, a program component that includes arts education for the community. It's a good example of what we do with the abstracts. We're linking out a lot to other sites, the funder, the recipient. The original source citation is always at the bottom. And we're also providing related links that are curated by P&D staff to items related to this one. In this case, they're grants either in Austin or for arts education. If we go back to our results page, you'd see any number of grants, and there are quite a few results pages, made for the purposes of arts education or to museums in many cases that are going to have arts education as a component of their programming. You'll also see, let's see, reports in here, maybe not in this one, I'll go to the next page. And commentary, for example, here, a nice opinion piece from Minnesota Philanthropy Partners, talking about the subject in broad terms, maybe not applicable to Austin, but certainly applicable to anyone who's working in the space. And you'll find things like organizational profiles. Here's an organization called ArtsBridge in New York that works locally in arts education issues. So again, not much in Austin, a lot on arts education, trend stories, whether it's being funded, funding trends. You get a sense of organizations working in the space nationally, regionally, and you get a sense of funders who are making grants. And our cutoff for Philanthropy News Digest grants is $1 million and over, so it would be making significant grants for arts education. The one exception to that rule is in our community foundation update feature, which we run out on Saturday, a collection of items from community foundations, and these grants can be anywhere from $500 to $100,000 for a variety of purposes. So you'd have to do a little legwork to check each of these links out. On the new site, as you saw, it's going to be easier with a faceted search. I want to learn about organizations working in this space. You can go right to that and find the half dozen, the dozen that we have in that archive of 20,000 items. Or I just want to learn about news. You can go right to that in the news site.
Thank you. I think that gives our library visitor a lot of food for thought.
We do have some questions coming in.
Okay.
We do have some questions coming in from online, and just at first, we have some things related to IssueLab content. One of them is there anything in IssueLab about farm animals? And I assume that there is a listing of all the special collections on IssueLab. Just Is that true?
Yes. Farm animals. I tried to imagine exactly which topics would come up, right? I'll answer the first one about special collections. It's the easier one in a way. Yes, we do keep all the special collections. There's actually we feature 4 special collections on the homepage always that are sort of the most recent ones or ones that are coming back into the news. So for instance, this is actually a site, a portal of information on efforts around black male achievement that we brought back to the surface after the Trayvon Martin case. So we do keep them all. They're also listed up in that pulled at the Explore menu. Farm animals. I'm going to say a couple ways to get at it. Let's go to agriculture and food or animal welfare, right? So there may be things that are cross-referenced in both of those. I know animal welfare actually is not, it's not a very robust section on IssueLab, but we'll see what we come up with for agriculture and food. And if farmed animals, now that's sort of sad, but we'll click on it anyhow. I feel like they are animals on their own right before being farmed, but that's just my personal opinion. So only one big chicken, pollution in industry poultry production in America. But my guess is if we actually go maybe into animal welfare, we might get there. And let's see if agriculture brings us meat consumption in China, now double that in the United States. So you'll see there's actually, in some, right, those should have come up. Both of them should have come up under both of them, ideally. And that's something that, for those of you who care about this kind of stuff, I think you probably do. We originally started allowing users we started crowdsourcing the keywords. And as you can imagine, that was really useful up until about 5,000 listings. And then it started to turn into this enormous hairball of keywords. And so we are now actually figuring out, and we welcome in this community of librarians, any feedback and suggestions on how to kind of, wrangle that herd of cats called keywords. Because people are thinking about these topics differently, we want to know how they're thinking about them, but it also makes these kind of searches more difficult. And then the other option would be to search, and let's see what comes up here, is farm animal. It's like a crapshoot. It's kind of scary. Or I should have done exact phrase. Yeah, anyhow, I can go back and see if exact phrase.
I do have a couple other questions that have come in on here, but if people do have questions, you can come up. I know some of you are very, very far away, but you're still allowed to ask questions.
Yeah. So that's farm animals. Not a lot on it, but it's in there. And then I would say that if I were if a patron came to me and asked that, I would actually have them look at what organization is producing that research. And then it really becomes a gateway into looking at, I would not have known that Pew Charitable Trusts is actually doing any kind of research on farm animals. So that becomes really kind of a reference and citation spot to start your larger search, I think, than necessarily it all being on IssueLab. I don't know if you want to field the farm animal question, or if we want to.
You can see what's there.
Okay.
Interesting. I think I might try the news site. See if we can do a little bit more with that. There we go. I'm going to do animal welfare and identify right and try agriculture. Did I? Nope.
Typo.
Close. All right.
There we go.
Thank you. And so we don't have much in here. So our biggest category would be news. And
Speak into your microphone.
oh, and you can see the ASPCA as a funder. Some trend stories, post-Katrina, Maddie's Fund, a big shelter organization, as many of you may know, et cetera. I was thinking there might be reports here, not so much, but organizations working in the space, that might be potential leads, might be doing interesting work that they're describing on their website that that patron would benefit from. So that's the kind of things you'd get in a, as Gabby said, a fairly small subject area for us, but there's something there.
Hi, I have a question. Either of those sites, do you think, have any information on Native American tribes in the United States and economic development? And more specifically, is it better for the tribe to hold their own economic development activities, or is it better to outsource that to other folks? Thank you.
I know that we have a lot of information on Native American development. The search engine on the current site is not the most robust, so it works best when searches, keyword searches, are kept simple, and it didn't work at all there, did it?
You got-
It might be. Let's try that. I know we just did a story on Tuesday.
So this case sensitive.
So a lot of items, 275. I probably wouldn't recommend in the current site searching by specific tribes. You might get something, but it would be pretty hit or miss. So you can see, though, it's a nice mix of, again, of reports in this case, which would link you directly to the PDF, all the connections items, and there is a lot of overlap with IssueLab. Our real-time canvassing of the web allows us to find these things as they're posted, and then we typically feed them over to IssueLab for archiving on a more permanent basis. But the reports that we post to P&D are all publicly available for free on other websites. No registration required, no fee required, most importantly. So again, I can scroll down here and you can get a sense that you could spend probably a profitable 30 minutes going through these links and finding information about economic development in Native American communities, organizations, potential funders, and reports. And then I would jump over to the RFP side of the equation if someone in fact is looking for funding. And that would probably, do we have a quick?
Community development, maybe?
It might be community development. I would, again, probably try the keyword search. And you might find a few funding opportunities. So you'd have some success. And these funding opportunities, are on the site for the period of the application period when that deadline arrives, then the RFPs roll off the site. So they all should be live RFPs and funding opportunities on the site.
I know that there is work in IssueLab, and I can do it, or I can just tell you that there is work on, and I can't say, there you are, on Native tribes and definitely on community and economic development. I know a recent report that we just published earlier this week was about Native arts as an economic development engine and the potential of that, which was very much about sort of internal engines versus looking at outsourcing of economic development. The answering the actual question, right, of like what is the best approach, right, or what is the key finding of the reports. 99.9% of what comes into IssueLab is in a PDF format. And so historically, the sector has kind of locked its knowledge in these units, right? These like chunks of knowledge that have been a little bit hard to pick apart. And that's something that we're actually just developing a prototype around now, is beginning to machine extract the key findings so that you could search not just, I don't want just results on which reports address economic development in tribes, but I want the key findings of those reports for exactly this reason, that people just do not have the time to read 60, 70-page white papers to find the answer. So yeah, there's definitely work in there, and it would be a good starting place. But I think this second piece, which is about digesting the knowledge of the sector, especially as we have 13,000, almost 14,000 pieces in there now, and we know we're just scratching the surface. And so it's like, how do we make that not just this mountain of knowledge that's coming at people? And that's exactly what we're trying to do in our next set of developments. Yeah.
And as Gabby mentioned, there are, as you all know, there are a lot of different ways to go at this. And the more you know about a topic, the more you're going to find. So if you happen to know that the Bush Foundation in Minneapolis funds a lot of Native development efforts, you could start funding on the Bush Foundation. In fact, we covered their announcement of the third cohort of their fellows for 2013. That's in North South Dakota, Minnesota. A lot of it Native American development. If you know, the Northwest Area Foundation does a lot of funding in Native communities. You can follow that avenue. And you would end up with a really nice, well-rounded picture of any topic, pretty much. Maybe not animal welfare, but
We're getting there.
working on it.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of questions that are coming in online, and I'm going to try and kind of gather some of them together. We have one question that simply asks, is material available in Spanish? Another person is an academic institution that wants to share reports that are in Spanish. Can they submit them to IssueLab? So.
Yeah, we do have a growing number of publications in Spanish and other languages, partly because of something I mentioned in the introduction, which are these knowledge centers, which are the way that other organizations can have a version of IssueLab running on their own site. And we have a coalition, or really a network of networks in Latin America who are using a knowledge center and are beginning to add a lot more research that we didn't have access to before. That's in Spanish and Portuguese, and increasingly some in Arabic as well. That presents some challenges in search, and it also presents and sort of challenges us to think about is there work that we want to then translate as well. And so that's something that we've been thinking about, is sort of where to start that process, how to start that process, with what body of literature in particular. But there is Spanish language content that's growing. If somebody wants to add to IssueLab, and this is the case for anybody, they literally can go on to IssueLab and create an account for free. It takes just, here, I'll quickly just point it out. So let's say I wanted to, I clicked on that little plus button up in the right-hand corner, and if I don't already have an account, I can create an account. It takes just a couple of minutes, and then I'm free to add any research that I think would be useful. We do have criteria for inclusion on IssueLab. The first is that it actually has the intention of improving practice in the sector. So we don't take work that is like a commercial. We don't take work that's an opinion piece. We don't take editorials. We require that the work has citations. And that is because we don't actually vet the quality of the content. We believe that people have different information needs and make decisions for themselves about what's useful to them, but they need to be able to look at the original source of that data. So we sometimes get fact sheets that have no citations and we can't put them in the collection. But otherwise, we welcome anything that's freely available and that addresses the sort of core intention and mission of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
I have a technical question. I work in an academic institution, so a lot of the gray literature would be of interest, like in our library catalog, which is now a discovery tool. Is anyone using Primo or something similar like that? Are those, you said those records are indexed in WorldCat, so are they MARC records, or can they be batched as MARC records and integrated into a catalog discovery system?
Yeah, we use an open access archive initiative protocol.
Okay.
And so they can be harvested. We have a harvester, and we're actually releasing an API like later next month.
Right.
So I mean, you literally you can either get them straight through the harvester if you have anybody who's like a little bit technical on staff, or you can wait for the API and it'll be a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, that stuff is all freely available and can be.
Has anyone done that? I'm just curious. Has anyone integrated that? Okay.
But yeah, we would love to have it in as many streams as possible.
Mitch, we have a question actually about the new version of PND.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person that says, I'm teaching a class in early November and would like to include PND. Could Fin members gain access to the new website early to have a more detailed look around before it goes public?
We just migrated that data to the development site overnight, as I mentioned earlier, and I think it's going to be 2 weeks or so for staff to do some basic Q&A on the site. There's a lot of information on it. Not all of it is accurate. Not all of it imported seamlessly. Most of it did. I would say by the week of October 23rd, the answer to that question is yes. So have them contact Keefe, and we'll give them the address.
Sounds good. There's a couple of questions here that are related to terminology. One is asking, do you have a terminology guide for suggested terms to do the searches? And is there maybe a taxonomy on the IssueLab site that you would recommend? There's obviously a couple librarians that are suggesting controlled vocabulary.
What? No controlled, no, I'm kidding. I mean, the best place to start is the issue area taxonomy, which is if you go into explore issue areas, you'll see the 40 different issue areas. And then you can drill down into those. Like I said, the sort of more faceted piece from the bottom up, we're struggling with a little. It's in there, and you can filter by keyword, but not every piece in there has been universally keyworded the same way. So you'll see, and you're all familiar with this, bicycle, bicycles, bicycling, bikes. You know, originally the idea was, this is so great. Some people think about bikes, other people think about bicycling, you know, and then it was like, this isn't great at all. So we're trying, so it's a controlled vocabulary from the top down. I think the bottom up piece is the challenge that we're still kind of trying to figure out.
What's the phrase you use, the hairball of terms?
The hairball of keywords, yes, yes, yeah.
This is, I guess, for both of you, but is there a way that this person wants to know what reports are coming out of their region and or community, and when local organizations have a new post, is there any kind of alert system either?
Go ahead.
Well, you can talk about the IssueLab alerts, okay? Why don't you do that?
Yeah, we do send out a weekly email alert, and it's issue-based, though, not geographically based. It's a good idea, actually, to do it geographically based. I would suggest that before we create a geographically based email alert, for that person to email me too, because what we could do is actually just set up an RSS feed that is for that specific region. Like, that's simple for us to do. You could also embed those feeds, like if any of you want content, for instance, in your own websites that comes from IssueLab that would match a set of criteria, we can set up that custom feed to just pull the research in. So that may be more useful actually to people, because then they'd be in your environment as well. But we do on a weekly basis send out to about 30,000, a little more than 30,000 people who subscribe to our a weekly update of new publications that are added to the site.
And PND does offer nightly news alerts and RFP alerts that are subject-based. Here's our subject menu, talking about taxonomy. The Foundation Center, uses NTE or its own version of NTE. PND uses a very broad slice of that, 28, 30 terms. But by registering on the site and choosing as many of these terms as you want, every time we do an item, publish an item to the site, news or RFP, that's tagged with one of these terms, we would kick out a very brief news alert to your email box with a headline and a 250-character summary, and that might save you a little time coming to the site and searching yourself. The goal, I think, in 2014 is to, two goals. 2014-15 for the taxonomy is to harmonize the taxonomies that the Foundation Center uses across all its properties in a way that will be able to deliver PND content, IssueLab content, grant-space content to the device of your choice. And in terms of alert, we're hoping to further develop the system so that it won't be based on these broad terms, but in fact on the individual terms that we're tagging each item with in fields here at the bottom. So it could be people, it could be geography, it could be farm animals. If we decide that's the right term and you want to subscribe to that alert. It'll be much more flexible and targeted and granular. It will take a while, but I would say by this time next year, we will have made some progress on both of those fronts.
Okay, just a couple more, a little bit wider open questions. One of them is, does PND suggest also checking IssueLab on their website and vice versa?
We are going to be featuring IssueLab all the time on our new website in a content box at the bottom, special collections anytime they're developed. And I'm not sure we're featured on your site or not.
Yeah, it's going to be vice versa as well. So if you, for instance, are in an issue area and there's related news about that issue area that was posted in PND, we're going to start bringing that into IssueLab's interface. But I think Mitch is right in that, like, that's a big sort of challenge and project for Foundation Center now, is like how to not have all these sort of disparate properties, but have them be more and more and better integrated with each other. So making the interface sort of reflect some of what I think you get through Power Search.
And as Gabby mentioned, I mean, IssueLab is being fed to a lot of FC properties, as is PND. They're just not being fed to each other at this point.
Does PubHub still exist, or has it been subsumed in IssueLab?
It has been subsumed.
Okay.
So everything that was in PubHub is indexed and searchable through IssueLab. Yeah.
Okay, and this is more of a wide open question. Is anyone funding data mining in the nonprofit sector?
Yes.
Is that a PND search, maybe?
Yeah,
If
you
could
can
do a
answer that
PND
question.
search.
And
I guess I was
I'll look for
thinking more about who we're trying to, because data mining is a big effort at IssueLab as well, and who we're sort of hearing is interested in those. And a lot of it is being done in digital humanities.
You made a typo.
Can't tell you.
And a lot of
Can't
it
see.
is being done in like machine learning around like biological sciences and medical sciences. Very little of it has been done around social sector literature and gray literature, and so that's a sort of big area of potential growth, I think. But in terms of who, yeah, we could probably end up with an actual.
Yeah, data mining, no hits, data, a lot of hits, I'm not sure what's there. I mean, I think that there are a few very large foundations, based on our coverage of the sector, that are very interested in making the sector more data-driven. And they would include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a significant funder of the Markets for Good effort that you might be familiar with, the Hewlett Foundation, the Packard Foundation.
Sloan is another one.
Sloan.
Mellon.
Yeah, I don't know if Benton is doing much in the way of funding anymore, but that would probably be a search on FDO,
Yeah, I agree.
and you would find things because there are foundations out there that are driving that bus.
And they may have just recently started talking about it as data mining, right? I mean, there may be other search terms that get at that that aren't
This could be a homework assignment for the boot camp people tomorrow.
awesome, yes. Please share your findings.
Any questions from the audience? Anyone else? You can hold it.
Easy question. Do you have a search widget for IssueLab?
We do,
Oh, great.
yes.
Right,
Where
anybody
does
else?
one get that?
That's a
Is
good
it on the
question, Cheryl. It's on the
foundationcenter.org?
foundationcenter.org site.
Do you know where it is, Mitch?
No, I don't.
But we can send it in a follow-up,
Probably in the about.
Right.
yeah,
About
where
us
all
section.
the widgets are.
Any other questions in the room? Yes?
Maybe my perception is just after lunch, but I noticed in there like a mobile food truck report, and that didn't feel purely nonprofit to me. It's felt more like maybe social entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing, didn't really see a lot on that topic there. But in my mind, that's sort of a big move. This, you know, what do they call it? The third sector? No. But you
The
know,
social ventures
right,
and, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what that says to me is maybe this is a tool to use for people who are not purely nonprofits.
I think that's right.
So talk to me about it.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of additional audiences. I'd say consultants, actually, and evaluators who are trying to get like a quick overview, too, of a particular topic, who they're maybe not issue experts, right? They're not people who are like working in housing day in and day out, but they need to understand trends in the sector. So sort of professionals that are maybe moving from one issue to another. A lot of that research is actually in, there's an issue area called nonprofits and philanthropy. So, you know, obviously it all has to do with this, what the sector's doing, but most of the research is about, right, so 2,500 pieces out of the 13,500 are specifically about approaches that are changes or funding trends. And so you could find, if you were looking at something like social entrepreneurship as an approach versus like, you know, a case study on food trucks, right? So they would be cross-referenced, but if really someone wants to catch up on like the actual sort of trend in the sector, that's where I would suggest they goes into the nonprofits and philanthropy group. And I do think that, I mean, my hope, I think there's a pretty broad audience of people using IssueLab. It's not always clear to us. Like, it's sort of surprising. You know, sometimes we'll hear from people and I'll be like, I did not think those people were using it at all. So, I mean, it's like this incredibly diverse audience, and so it makes it a little hard in a way. But my guess is the more and more professionalized the sector gets, the larger and larger that audience will be too. That they're not just falling into grant seeker, grant maker.
Well, in North Carolina, there's a creature called a low profit, and I don't know.
Kind of hybrid.
It's a fairly new legal construct,
Huh.
but I have had them approach me about how I can help them, and that's why I'm trying to get my mind around whether this is a possibility.
Right, like kind of B corporations and sort of alternative. You know what, let's look if, and yeah, if you want to.
Well, I'll just jump in. I'm not sure it's directly to your point, but I know here in New York, the big funder of that effort is the Lori Tisch Illumination Fund. And if you were to go to that website, they have a lot of documentation about their efforts, which they feel has been very successful over the last couple of years. So that might be a good resource for it.
Yeah, in some ways I almost wonder if P&D would be a better source on social entrepreneurship because you're covering the sector, you know, versus, like that's one segment of what we do, but I bet you could get, especially like some of your newsmaker interviews and the flip chats that would specifically address. And I know that like the Atlanta office and is also, and the San Francisco office is fielding a lot of questions from people on social entrepreneurship, accelerating that, business plans. So they'd also be a good source.
Yeah. I'm sure it's frustrating for, I'm sure it's frustrating for people to be told you just have to dig and dig, but that's sort of the way it works, as you all know. If you can find a hook and start pulling, it's going to lead to other places. The great thing about both of our archives is that they're purely items related to the social sector. It is not, as Gabby said early in her presentation, a Google search. So, you know, that's what we're doing. We're finding material that relates to the work that your patrons and the people you work with and see on a regular basis do. And there's not a lot of chaff in those results. It might not be appropriate, but with a little bit of pulling on that thread, you know, you're going to find something in more cases than not.
No more questions online? Are there any more questions in the room? If not, I have one.
I didn't want to comment about toolkits on IssueLab if the cooperating collections aren't utilizing that piece. if you don't have the answer to a question, toolkits, and I'm sure she can show you how it works, is a stunning, amazing resource on how to do something. You know, how do we do an economic impact of nonprofits in our community?
Yeah.
And then to go forward with that and find the tool that tells exactly how that works is a wonderful piece of information to be able to hand over to someone else in the community.
And we're getting more and more of those, actually. I mean, right now there's 450 of them, but we're getting more and more of those into the collection every day. And that's something that I think also the Grant Space website has a lot of awesome content, and I would check them for stuff on social entrepreneurship too. But yeah, these toolkits are like, the whole point is to lay it out for someone else. So they're pretty awesome.
Anyone else?
There was a question actually just came in, if there is information on these portals for library grants.
Yeah, IssueLab, there's not a lot of grants per se that way, you know.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. What's going to be my best strategy? Libraries. Be under arts. Gates Foundation. Sure, the TechSoup ad article has a lot of good information, not so much about funding, but about technology. You know, the short answer is there's some information about library funding there. And, you know, maybe a way I would recommend using P&D in this case, in a situation like this, would be to start here, get a few names, and then take that short list of names and go to FDO. You can do this at home on a Friday night, a Sunday morning, you know, from your iPad or your computer. If you don't have access to FDO Professional, you don't have to come down to the cooperating collection. They can do that first exploratory research, have a few names on a list, and then come down to the collection, the information network, and get into Professional and dig more deeply.
Yeah, I think that's a case where it's like actually FDO and P&D play really nicely, you know, in sort of rounding out the research to do a better job of using FDO and vice versa.
You know, that one of the original spirit behind P&D was free, available all the time to anyone.
So, Gabi, you mentioned this before, but there's a topic that's in the news today, the Affordable Care Act, and you mentioned that you're putting together a special collection in IssueLab, but so I would imagine that might be a topic that some people are interested in knowing if we have more information about and can dig deeper.
Yeah. Right, so next week we will do, I mean, this is an example where, let's say we go into, you know, an issue area of health, and filter on the keyword term Affordable Care Act. You'll see 148 reports that are specifically about the Affordable Care Act. And I think that this really points actually to why I think this body of knowledge is pretty unique, is that in all of this debate, I think a lot of what gets left out often is, you know, how are the nonprofits who are serving people, you know, to meet their health needs, but also to address the health costs that land them at their doors. How do they feel about the Affordable Care Act? How are they navigating its implementation? What are their fears, their concerns? You know, the idea that, you know, this has actually been underway now for quite some time and people are working to implement it on the ground already. It's not like, you know, they threw up the health exchanges last week. This, you know, body of research, right? I mean, as unprepared as I think the Republicans feel like people are, there's a lot of research here about what nonprofits are doing to try to make the most out of that piece of legislation, for better or worse. So what we'll do next week is kind of take that bigger collection and weed out some of the things that were like really specific about pieces of the bill that may not have actually gotten passed, and really kind of hone it to this moment in time and the current debate. But I think it's a great example of where the nonprofit voice and perspective and this collective intelligence that we have could really inform the larger public, not just other nonprofits. But yeah, you'll see there's just an incredible range of work on that topic too. Yeah. So.
And if you are in a state that is embracing the exchanges and moving to implement them, let's say a state like California, you'll find a lot of information about real-time actions that are happening right now on the ground, driven by funders like the California Endowment. You'll find websites with calculators that we've covered. You'll find stories about what they're doing to smooth the implementation of the act in that particular state. California might be the exception, but for other states that are embracing the legislation, I'm sure those materials will be useful.
Well, I think we're getting close to the end of our time. We have a little more time. So does anybody else have a question about a topic that is hot in your community that people come to the library asking about, want to learn something? David's got the mic open.
All right.
Is that like you're casting a spell?
I do have a question. Someone was interested in funding projects to develop food gardens in schools and in prisons, and was looking for some kind of demonstrable effect of outcome, that this has been done before and how it benefited the overall community. So, I mean, I would try all kinds of keywords, so I'm just curious if there's anything that pops up.
Yeah, I love that question. Being a gardener.
Right, and a farmer.
I know we have information about funding for school gardens. There are a couple of garden companies, tool and implement companies that do a lot of work in there. One of them is called Fiskars, Fiskars. It's there, and I'm not quite sure how to get at it. I tried Fiskars. It didn't work in the RFP section. If I tried
What
the news
happens if
section.
you search for garden?
Garden?
Does that
well,
turn up anything?
That's what I was just thinking
Probably.
too.
Or gardens?
Is there a truncation search, or is it, I mean, if I wanted to do garden and gardens, I mean, is there a symbol I could use for truncation?
On the current site,
Question mark.
on our current site, not so much. It's pretty limited. I think on the new Easy Publish site that will be rolling out at the end of the month, yes, and I'm guessing it's going to be asterisk.
And I think ours actually uses asterisks. I would double check that, but I think that's right. And I think if you do you want me to try?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah? I would say the same thing, to try, not Garen, but garden. And let's do school at the same time. Farm to school and school garden policy, 3 lessons from California's highest achieving high schools, which probably includes the term, includes garden initiatives. Let's see if we do garden.
Community gardens or gardens in health.
Right. Community gardens might. No, that one doesn't, I know. No. How's that? The last question resulted in no. You know, and we thank you for bringing that to our attention. Apparently, we have some research work to do on gardens and prisons. Yes. No. Yes, exactly. Nope, can't help you on that one.
Who else has a question to stump Gabi and Mitch?
No, we were doing so well. We were on a roll for a minute there.
Rather than ask these, because a couple of coming in, and I think it's everybody saying, well, what about this term and what about that term? So they're food hubs, post-incarcerated population.
Yes.
You don't have to necessarily know those, but all of those things I would imagine you would have in there. I don't actually know exactly what a food hub is. Food exchange? Yeah, so like a food bank.
Well, one person might grow X, Y, Z food crop, another person would grow A, B, and C, and they would exchange.
Oh, I
So
see.
one
Oh,
person
that kind of, okay.
isn't doing multiple crops. Like bartering? Kind of like bartering.
Mhm.
Space
I know there's a lot of content in IssueLab about post-incarceration and the reintroduction of people who are imprisoned into the community. I have to say, I think it's actually interesting that we're getting a few questions now on like agriculture-related content. And the thing that we see at IssueLab is that there's some issue areas that are just dominated by research, right? I mean, like education is just, for all kinds of reasons that we're all aware of, is just like flooded with money, largely, on sort of understanding and analyzing and evaluating educational reform. So we just see tons of it. And then and they're super organized, right? And so then we see other topics like environmental justice that it's really difficult to actually find the research, and it's hyper-local and super dispersed. And so this is really, I mean, you know, I'm not just like, I can't find the garden thing and now I gotta make something up, but it really is good for me to hear because it's like, you know, these are exactly the topics that I think are the most difficult that aren't coming across our desk that we have to seek out, you know. And some part of me thinks, and maybe this is crazy and I'll regret saying this, but like I feel like it would be really useful even for a week if like every one of you sent us like the questions you get, you know, like what are the most commonly asked questions, because then we could start. Because it's like we're like 10,000 miles away from the questions that people are asking. We can look at search, but beyond that, we don't have a ton, you know? So I don't know if any of you would be interested in like serving almost as like a focus group or something. For a week, we could track search terms and see what across the network we're getting, and then start building collections around those things with a little intelligence and purpose. But so if anybody's interested, I think both Lauren and I would be.
Yeah.
Everything. We count everything.
Right.
I was going to ask you to do that, so.
Yeah, no, it would be great. I mean, it would really help us to, because otherwise you end up with these really biased collections too, right? They're all skewed towards who's funding research and where it's, and who's got the money, right? And that's not necessarily where the questions are. So yeah, I'd love it.
And in our case, it's skewed to funders with communications departments who are putting word out, organizations that want to get word out. So the small topics, the small organizations working in those space, they're not really well represented.
It also seems like maybe in your libraries, you're in contact with those smaller organizations who may be producing these reports, and I think, you know, knowing that you can recommend to them to upload that content to IssueLab could help everybody.
It would be great.
Yeah. So now we are out of time, yes?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Enjoy the rest of the conference.